Hi, I'm
Howdy, Gary.
with Miles Morrisseau, and my name is Gary Farmer, and welcome to Film Talk Weekly. Miles, we've known each other for a long time. One of the things I really wanted to talk about to start us off was to talk a bit about our relationship, but also helping our audiences understand in Canada, you're part of the Métis Nation. And, you know, people in America might say Métis, not knowing that it's kind of a French word where the last letter isn't always pronounced. So Métis, but tell us a bit about the history of the Métis and how you all became Métis in Canada.
Well, you know that I grew up in the Métis Nation in Manitoba. It's often referred to as the homeland of the Métis, and grew up a descendant of what I would later discover, like a lot of Indigenous people. It's you learn your history from from your family and from your own research. You're not going to hear this in the history books. So although there is that documentation of the Riel Rebellion, the Northwest Rebellion, following that, and that part of the Métis story, but you know, um, I grew up in a time when the nation was incredibly vibrant. You know, my dad's family, the Morrisseau family, um, we're descendants of the Southern nation, I guess the more well-known nation, the Red River Métis, so that's largely, French and Soto or Anishinaabe and Catholic Church and the Red River and Northwest Company, you know, and that's the southern part, you know, and in the northern part, it's Cree and Scottish and Anglican Church and Hudson Bay Company and the Saskatchewan River, you know, and those five, right? That's my mom's side, you know, and so um, that's something that I came to realize, through my own experience. I mean, I knew that the cultures were different, but that we were, we all identified as Métis at that time. And as I said, it was vibrant. Like in the north, the families, it was a fishing family, hunting and trapping family, and the northern life was, you know, was dog sleds and winter festivals um, you know, uh, and so much dancing, like just so much, you know, and then
And the
the
fiddle
south.
was large there too, right? The fiddle became
Oh, it was absolutely like, it was essential part of the whole, that's when the party would start, right? I mean, I grew up with my grand in my when we would go visit my grandmothers and my dad's side of the family, we'd all get tucked to bed and there would always be this guitar hanging up on the wall and would like nobody would play it. It's like who's this for? But then the party was on and suddenly the guitar was off the wall and somebody else had showed up with a fiddle and then it was just singing and dancing, all night long, and that and in the South it was like, in the summertime it was rodeo. Like we were, like we had farm, I grew up, we moved to my dad's community when I was 8 years old and went from, first being a boy, a northern boy, a bush boy, and then we were in the city for 1 year and then we went to my dad's community and I become a farmer, end up, taking care of cows and pigs and chickens and the whole thing, right? And that was that life. It was just a really, and it was two kind of different, for lack of a better way of looking at it, like two tribes of the Métis Nation, of the traditional historic Métis Nation, right? And the Métis
Louis
Nation that,
Riel fit into that
yeah,
history,
Louis
right?
Riel, that the founder of that we found in Manitoba that were fathers and partners in Confederation, like unlike any other uh, you know, indigenous people in that in the the founding of the country that the Métis Nation were partners in that, and that the Manitoba Act is in the Canadian Constitution, and yet I mean my family, when I'm up north, our family is on land that was part of the land that was you know settled to us when we settled the province of Manitoba. 1.4 million acres of land is in the Canadian Constitution that is Métis land, and we don't have 1 acre. Like if my father hadn't come up with I think almost $4,000 some 30 years ago, which was a lot of money. Still is a lot of money. Things are getting tough. We would have lost the family land, um, to the tax man.
Yeah.
But as I said,
Let
like
me
I mean, we could have lost land that is supposedly guaranteed to our people in the Canadian Constitution. If those taxes weren't paid, and so the land that should always be our land, could one day just be taken by the tax man, or just you know and so there's a lot of unsettled things for us. As I said, the historic Métis people, and Gary, we had this conversation I think many times, but it's not like if people want to identify as Métis, right? Like this, that they somehow, however, like they may have once identified as Métis many years ago. I don't know, or whether they don't know what their indigenous ancestry is exactly, but they know they have some, and then that they're happy, or want some kind of identity, and so they identify as Métis. And I can't um I can't get into that space where I'm telling somebody who they are, or
let me
yeah,
ask
no, just
another
like,
question, Miles. Okay.
yeah,
What brought you south? And I know you came to the University of Western Ontario to go to journalism school, and that's where you met your wife to be, and you have a number of children. And then you came into the Ontario experience. Is that how you became into journalism?
yeah, it was not
Mm.
it wasn't like this is what I wanted to do. It was something that I fell into. I actually wanted to get into the world of advertising. I just thought that was the coolest thing, right? Like I just remember thinking, um, I went to somebody had an advertising agency in a building I was working in. And so I went downstairs, and it had just all the coolest things hanging on the wall. He had a Mickey Mouse watch. He wore suspenders and tri-colored. I was like, that's what I want to be, right? Like, okay, this is the coolest guy in Winnipeg, right? And so then I was advised, like, well, there's a program for journalism for that you could maybe get funding for, right? But that would be the closest thing for you to get into this, be a madman, right? And so then I came with that intention, and then it was like that phrase that they came up with. I mean, I know it's been around, but in popularity, you get woke, and all of a sudden I got woke, right? I came in, and there's 15 Indigenous people from across Canada, and they came there with that vision of, we have to share our people's stories. We're being ignored, and we're being right. And all of a sudden, you know,
Yeah.
I stopped, and I looked at my own life, and the stuff that was going on in my own community, because that's what people were bringing to the table. Like, this is what happened to us, and this is what's going on. And this story's been ignored for, not for the last year, for the last, for decades, or whatever, right? And so then I began to see the same thing, the stories that have been neglected in my own community, in my own world, right? And yeah, and so then I got, I got born again,
Bit by
or
the fire. Yeah, you got bit
yeah,
by the fire.
indoctrinated into it, going, holy man, and then And then, as you know, like my partner Shelley Brissette, like all the she had all the philosophies formed, like the ideas of this, that I was not, things I hadn't, I wasn't aware of, but whether it's the goal of the
That
free
came from her
presses.
matriarchic family, right? Her matriarch, her mom was
Yeah, yeah,
driven
no, they were active. Yeah, they were all in, like they were all,
politics.
incredibly political, right? And and yeah, like that, the notions of afflicting the comfort and comforting the afflicted, and all these little, phrases of a part of this, profession that we, that was, that's the thing about this, it's like this once noble profession, like I think that, like I think that, for, for us, like for indigenous peoples, this concept that they, had come up in the last couple of years, that is dangerous, but only dangerous in the fact that, that people weren't paying attention in the first place, was this idea of fake news, right? And that for us, it's been fake forever, right? It's like everything that, it's always been one-sided. It's always been, with the goal to, continue the propaganda, or continue the role of colonization forever. Journalism has always played that role. And I mean, I wrote this, heck, I don't know, Gary, like 20 years ago, when they started saying, okay, well, people are calling on residential school just, to apologize, the government of Canada to apologize, these institutions. Recently, the Canadian Medical Association apologized for over, centuries of abuse of Indigenous peoples. When will someone stand up from the Canadian, journalism, elite, somebody from the CBC, and say, look, we failed. Not only did we fail, but we participated in propaganda, that we ignored, like, like, I mean, you're going to, I mean, there were residential schools right, and they weren't all hidden. The majority were hidden, and but I mean, even if I mean, you're out in Saskatchewan and you're working for some, you know, press or radio, or again, CBC, because it's not unfair criticism. They're being funded. Money is given to them to tell the story. But we got these giant institutions in the middle of the prairie, right? No inclination to go, geez, what's going on in there? Maybe I should dig around, and then of course the famous Dr. Peter Bryce, right? With the national crime. He goes and finds the statistics that overwhelmingly showed that kids were dying by the hundreds, right? By the hundreds, right? And he was just, and this was 1922, right? He went,
Wow.
and nobody would cover it, and he published it, and he shared it. It's called a national crime. It's he went and did the
But
research
then
and got the numbers.
they do the Indian Act in 23, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, he was there right from the beginning, and went and visited the schools, and he did the work, and now, um we have people who are, you know powerful media. The New York Times, in the States, is, and I wrote about this for Indian Country Today, I think, just at end of October, as part of the coverage of the Truth and Reconciliation Day, is that the ongoing
Right.
denial of deaths, the amount of deaths at residential schools. They got these people like Tom Flanagan, who is known to be an anti-Indigenous, like that's his whole focus of his work, is one of, anti-Indigenous rights and anti-Indigenous sovereignty and anti-Indigenous historical realities. And um, the National Post here in Canada, they publish people that are denying that there is that amount of death. That there's not these graves all over Canada, and yet this Dr. Peter Bryce wrote about hundreds of kids dying in 1922, and then that system ran for another 130 years, and there were hundreds dying. I mean, it's just, you're dealing with powers, that are, to try to shake that, the foundation, right? The foundation of the very historical foundation of what they're built on, and part of the thing that keeps things rolling because Canada's, like it's always been just this big resource driven nation, like it's just that's all we have to do. Water, we have so much, and we have so many minerals, we have so much gold, there's so much uranium and all this stuff. And it's like, they're not, you know, they have so much of our resources to waste. They don't have to be an innovative, it's always like that. I always feel like people that are really rich, they have too much money to spend, they get to be lazy and stupid, right? Because they don't have to innovate, right? They don't have to. And it's like, a cousin of mine told me this 30 years ago. I remember when I, first went home for the first time, and we were having this discussion about this country, and he goes, why is it that Canada doesn't have a car of its own? Like there's Swedish cars, it's these smaller countries, there's these, South Korea produces X amount of cars, and here we are sitting on the actual, resources required, that, the steel and, everything to build, and yet it's just because we just have so much resources just laying around and pick up the gold. Like why do the heavy work of being innovative, and also, you know, um, promoting, yeah, just promoting Canadian innovation instead of just filling your boots with our resources, and destroying Mother Earth,
Yeah, you can see
So
that Northern Ontario, as they dig up chromium
yeah,
now, that's what they're going to rip up the north, which is our oxygen
yeah.
in the north here in Ontario, which is probably the largest province in Canada. But let me go back to your, our relationship, I guess, in terms of, founding Aboriginal People's Television Network, and of course the magazine I published, Aboriginal Voices, which you became kind of the lead writer for us, and of course me being the actor all along and still doing this along, you've had an opportunity to follow my career, and of course you write for an American U.S. Native publication called Indian Country Today, based out of Washington, D.C., which you used to be the editor in chief, and you stepped back from that and became exclusively a writer for them. Tell us about that experience coming into American scene with Indian Country Today, and beginning to follow kind of film history and film culture within the Indigenous people in both the U.S. and Canada.
You know, um, it, uh, it was one of the things that drove me from the beginning. When I came, Shelley had started the paper and had published, I think, five, maybe six issues, and so, need if we're going to do this, you need to come home. I was working at CBC, and National Native Affairs broadcaster for CBC at that time, and so when I came to take over Native Beat, the one of the the things that what I was a fan of before I got to university was I did enjoy uh, reading feature magazine articles. I love the Rolling Stone magazine and Esquire magazine and Vanity Fair, and those were all those, the New Yorker, and the age of, you know great writing, feature writing, and I absolutely, yeah, I just, I wanted to be part of a indigenous Rolling Stone that really celebrated our music and our artists, and movies and theater and all that stuff, right? So, um, when I came back, and the first thing we did was, just, you know, even though we were newsprint, just said, let's look cool, let's like make it look like, that people just, really appreciate how incredible, talented, and how, amazing our artists are, right? So, you know, um, and that was that the and it was that first kind of, right. It was that the different times when things are hot. So it was like that time when indigenous stuff, native stuff was hot, right? It was like Dances with Wolves had come out, right? So when I did the cover, it was Graham on the cover and the kicking bird, right? The full full dress from the movie, right? And things were just it was a great time. Like things were just starting to happen, and there were like so many opportunities, and like coming out of I did write about the theaters, Native Earth and the shows that were happening, and go and do reviews of plays, right, and go and see shows and travel to Manitoulin Island to go spend time with the Baj and Center for Indigenous Theater. I think was up there at the time too, right, for a period, and just felt like there was always something happening, and there was always some next thing that would be exciting about music that we would and we had that we had that obviously had that shared thing where you just start collecting stuff, right? And we're like, okay, well, I gotta share this with Gary, right? I gotta tell him about this or whatever. I remember I don't know where, I have no idea where we were going, right? We were traveling in the RV, right? And he said, you got to listen to this, you know, and he put in the Annie Humphrey CD that debut, or probably maybe it was in a cassette, but that first release from Annie Humphrey, and I was just like, and that whole thing to this day, right? Just like one song after the next, it's like absolute masterpiece, and it's like I don't know, like maybe it is absolutely a shame that more people just didn't realize that, just didn't. But um, we did. We like I could just remember it's like okay, yeah, I can feel transcendent. It's like and it's like it is a shame more people don't, but that's part of the thing, right? We all get to witness this stuff, and man, I remember that and there must be so much work out there too, right? Like that still needs to be seen, but um that that play about the crazy boy, the boy in the crazy house, or some such thing, right? It was just like it was just such an incredible, everything about it was just so it's such an incredible thing, and it was just like on and on and on. There was just so much work, and then then like we met. um I was at CBC, right? So before that, just before that, Native Beat, and before um I was having to work late night at the editing suite, and you were there working on that project, on the diabetes project, I think at the time, or something, with that special project for CBC. And
Actually, I was stealing time in CBC, but I was producing a show at CIUT, which was the public station at the University of Toronto. And I would sneak into the building and remember when we were back editing tape for audio before the computer, and so you had to cut tape, and there was no place to cut tape at the CIUT that you could get time for. So I used to sneak into the Jarvis Street Studios, where you were working with James Cullingham, who actually was the journalist for Leonard Peltier when he got pulled from Canada wrongfully, and ended up in jail for 49 years. It's amazing that he's just gotten out last week, but well, he's still not out. He's not out to the middle of February, but it was a special period for sure working with James, and who later, I worked with as a producer doing some early development for television for CBC and stuff. But it never worked out for me much in Canada. I always had more success. I had a lot of success as the actor in Canada, but in terms of trying to make headway for native media, the CRTC was very supportive, but I fought CBC tooth and nail because they thought they were the only ones that could be a public network and Aboriginal Voices Radio. I had to spend a lot of money defending our efforts, and often won 9 out of 10. So I had 70% of Canada by radio in turn of the century, well, about 2003. Anyway, it's a long story, but
It is, yeah. The
you
need
were
is still
there
there,
when
and
Powell
that's a shame of
Highway.
it.
Yeah, for sure. But you were there when Powell Highway was released. Of course, George Harrison produced the film. I married the screenwriter Gene Stallworth, who's still a dear friend and comrade, and a lot of effort. And we worked on many screenplays together. Who now taught at Emerson College and still does their annual summer trip to screenwriting up over in Spain. Um, but you were there when we that film first came out, and the impact that film had on your family and community and stuff. Could you tell us a bit about that and that?
Well, we were lucky to be able to see it on, the big screen, to go and see it in the theater, and it was a great crowd. The buzz had gotten around into the Native community somehow, right? Somehow people knew this, like, and get a chance to go chance to see this film, right? And so yeah, I mean, it really was that, just a great moment where you go, I never thought, uh, see something like this, like everything was just so, everything was just so, if it was going to be Dances with Wolves, right? It was going to be in the past, and it was going to be this thing, which, those are stories are still worth telling, but there wasn't anything so contemporary and that you could really relate to, like we lived on the res, you know what I mean? And um, and you could really relate to the characters, and then the music with Robbie Robertson's music, right? It's like, what is this? Like, and when Shelley and I left the theater, we went right across the street, and there was a record store, Sunrise Record Store, and we walked right in there, and the CD was there, and we picked it up, and you know, um, and then for as you well know, right? It just became such a cult classic within communities, right? Like we would just burn through the VHS and then the DVD, and everybody's quoting um, quoting the movie, for years, or daughters, nieces and nephews would find some shiny stone or some little thing, and they would pick it up, and they would smell it, and it would be like, you know, my first token, that way, and it, but I think that also meant something, right? It also meant that, yeah, there's something about us, right? There's something about us and indigenous people. There's something about us and this connection to the land, and these little stones do have power. These little shells do have power. They do mean something. And so that was, that was really an important part of our, because we love movies, and I think we talked about, this as well. It also became our part of our Christmas viewing, because it's happening around Christmas, so even though it's just kind of subtly it's just in the background, but it's like that's the time when things are going down, and yeah, I mean, you know uh, it's that kind of, like, I think that, you know that to be able to share in that, um with people. And then I was just talking to this author interview that I'm doing, and I said, like, there's so much beautiful art out there, right? Like, I just tracked down something that I think is, well, I'm going to spend my time criticizing this piece of art or this artist, right? Because if I'm going to search out a creator who's making work in our, for our community, and an indigenous creator, I want to celebrate them, you know, and so that's what, that's what I think is part of the job. Like, it's not just, I've done critical, investigative pieces in the last a couple of years, and I've covered covered tough subjects here. In Canada with the opiate crisis, murdered and missing, Indigenous women, and corruption and abuse and political organizations, and that's um, but it always all of these stories always have to be more than balanced by the positive things that are happening in our community. I feel like that's part of the job, and I think that you know, I'm just feel like we had that conversation, like it was like, like, I don't know if I want to credit you or credit me, but I just remember this conversation where it was just like, the garden's just beginning to grow and flower, and I'm sure it was you, that we need to help it grow, and we have to water. It's too early to start pissing on it. It's just like, it's just the why 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 go and criticize somebody's play because the sound was off. There was one performance that like they somebody whatever it is, and not just go, you know here's the whole, here's the magic and the beauty of this thing that's going on, right? And um because it's just that's the fake news of it, is that our people, our joy is so you know it just celebrated so little, like it was just so much, and then to come back to to Powell Highway, like that there was so many laughs in the film that it was, and it was just, it was joyous. It had that joy, right? And you get the, like, and it, like the piece that I wrote about the induction into the Library of Congress. It's like, yeah, there's these, like, these storytelling tropes that you've seen before in these movies, but never like this, because these are people that we can relate to finally. These are real people in real situations, and also just like, we know people that, you know, drive the absolute, how can this vehicle still be on the road, and they got it for a bag of weed, that these are things that, little touches that are just relatable to our world, right? And that was something, but you know I wanted to ask you about your own. How did you develop these philosophies regarding free press and our indigenous run media? Like, where did that, is that just something that was always there, or where did it come from?
Well, when I started in the theater, there was no native writers, there was no native directors, there was no native producers, there was hardly no native actors outside of Graham Tantu and I and Margot Kane and Shirley Chicho and you so we started doing television for Canada, and of course they were taking our stories, but it wasn't us. They were taking our stories. And even as a storyteller, you only get a certain percent, a small percent of the budget. And our writers weren't even getting that for their stories. It was all being controlled by, I don't want to, they're wonderfully creative people, but our community wasn't receiving the benefits. I was, as the actor, being paid, working under the, union as for actors in Canada called ACTRA. And, but, our storytellers weren't being paid. And then it was happening all over the place, in terms of our music, our literature. People said, well, why is there no native literature? So, well, it wasn't until 25 years ago there was, but nobody was reading it, and there wasn't that much. We weren't being published like we are now. These days, there's a book out by Native people a couple a month, if not more, and so there was nothing to read of our impact on culture and life and lifeways and experience in U.S. or Canada. It was even less so in the U.S. At least we had 300 community public stations on communities, mostly in the north, and they were trying to amalgamate the southern native people into into Canadian population, much like they were doing stateside. And when I saw that, I thought, let's take all of our stuff back and make it our own again. And that's why I started to publish. Really, I was trying to launch the radio network back in the turn of the 90s, from 93 on. I realized that the Minister of Environment isn't necessarily protecting the environment. He's negotiating an environment with big business, and he's not necessarily there to protect it. We're there to protect it, and we don't have any access to media. There's no electronic media in any native communities throughout North America. Mexico has more radio stations than the U.S. for native people down there, and so does New Zealand. I mean, it's still there's no way to communicate our concepts to our own people. And television, they replaced the church, right? I seen TV take over the North, where Northerners were flying from Big Trout Lake and down to Sioux Lookout to buy the Nike sneakers and eat the McDonald's, which messed up their diet, right? And now there's sickness throughout the North, but they were there. They put the television up there because you can consumerize a culture in weeks with television these days, and Canadians knew that, and they knew there was that swath of chromium they needed to embellish China's, Argentina, and all the new economies, India. And so that's the wealth of Canada, like you're talking about. That they never had to do anything. They just exploit resources, mostly under native lands, both in U.S. and Canada. So that's what, as the actor, I was informed because I had a journalistic heart always as the performer. And so that's why I started that whole effort. But I wanted to ask you, Miles, what's the impact of the Library of Congress for Powell Highway? And of course, this brings us to Santa Fe, where we shot half the film in New Mexico. It brought Gary Farmer to New Mexico for the first time, which now is my beautiful home. And I just love Pueblo culture, Dene culture, Comanche, Apache, it's all there. And cultures from all over the world come to the Institute of American Indian Arts, and the art scene is in all the arts is phenomenal. And it's really the home for me. But tell me about the impact of the Library of Congress and what that means for the film. I guess there's only 900 films in this whole.
Yeah, it is it is the ultimate film collection, and certainly to be, I mean, preserved in in all its forms, right? Obviously, you have the digital, the digital, form that, however, that can be preserved, but it's also, they went and got the most, pristine copy of it available on film, and that's, stored with